We're in week 3 talking about the Sermon on the Mount. And I know we had Coleman last week and we have Josh next week. And then leading up, we're going to have Sabbath in July. But I'm as often the Sermon on the Mount because it is a beautiful teaching. It is a beautiful time where Jesus sat down with his followers and really poured into them. Matthew 5, 6, and 7, he really goes into in depth about turning things around, how they had been taught. And they're not just these nuggets of wisdom that Jesus spoke. It's not like a collection of proverbs. Like the book of Proverbs, you can pull one verse out and that proverb is applicable in so many ways. The Sermon on the Mount is not Jesus just sitting down giving one-liners. It is an actual sermon, a message that he spoke to this crowd and how they could truly be blessed. He began that sermon with the Beatitudes and the blessings, and the way he described them or how the world says you're blessed if you're popular and everyone loves you. And this teaching of Jesus was radical, and it was different than they had been taught their entire lives, saying things like, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." He says you're blessed if you're persecuted for being his follower. The true blessing was that those Beatitudes bring us closer to Jesus, and that's the real blessing, is being in his presence. And then we looked, the next week, we looked at the Jesus identifying his followers, those who were persecuted, those who were poor in spirit. And then he looked at them and he said, "You are the salt of the earth. And you are the light of the world." So he's telling them that the blessing that they have is different than the world says what blessing is. And then he immediately followed it up by saying, "You're the salt of the earth and the light of the world." And we saw that salt brings flavor. Salt, when it interacts with something, it brings flavor, and it serves no purpose sitting on the shelf. What salt does is that it influences. And we saw how we are called to be influencers in the kingdom. We are called not to just sit on the shelf and not to let our light hide under a bushel. We saw how individually that we all are bearers of the light being Jesus. And it's great when we come into church together because our light shines brighter when we're around others who are like-minded with us. And that's a wonderful thing. But we can't let our light be hid under a bushel, even the bushel being the 4 walls of this building. We must take the light into the world and be influencers and be salt. Salt does nothing unless it comes in contact with something. So we are to be influencers in the kingdom of God, come in contact with them and change them for the kingdom. Jesus continues his teaching where we pick up our text today in Matthew 5, beginning in verse 17. "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." Father, I pray this morning that you will allow this text to jump off the page, that it will be firmly rooted in our hearts, that we can see how this written word can become living in our lives and how we seek righteousness. We seek you first, and then all the things will be added. In Jesus' name, amen. So again, I'll read that last verse. "I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven." The scribes and Pharisees, these are the religious leaders of the day. They studied the law of God. Night and day, they studied the law. They knew it forward and backward. I told you a few weeks ago, we said a few times about how in-depth it was an educational journey for them to get to the point where they could be considered a rabbi. And that's where the Pharisaical order came, and they had to have the Old Testament memorized. So they studied the law. They knew the law. And like I said, this teaching of Jesus was completely different than what they'd been taught their entire lives. Jesus comes along and he begins teaching this so revolutionary idea and yet so simple that it's threatening everything that they've known. Now, these are all Jewish people, the scribes, the Pharisees, and Jesus' followers. And they were what's considered God's chosen people. The Jews were God's chosen people. Thousands of years before this moment, God made covenant. God made covenant with Abraham, and he promised to bless his descendants as the sands of the sea. Time would go by. The Israelites would go into slavery in Egypt. They would move to Egypt to escape famine, but they would be turned to slaves while they were there, 400 years. God would deliver them out of Egypt. And in the wilderness, he made covenant with them again by giving them this gift. He loved them so much, he gave them a gift, and that was the law. He gave them his law. Now, in today's culture, we hear the term law, and it has negative connotations surrounding it. We hear law, and we hear rules. We hear things that we're not allowed to do. And if I cross this line, there are consequences. I'm guilty of breaking the law. So when we hear the term law, immediately our defenses go up. But the law of God, as it was given to the Jews, was not like that. It was not considered a bad thing. They loved the law. It was the most important thing that the world had seen up until that point. God gave Moses, on the mountain, he gave Moses the 10 Commandments. He gave the children of Israel what they called the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. We call that the Pentateuch, but it would come with the law and the prophets, meaning the original books of the Bible, and then the scrolls and the teachings of the prophets and the wisdom literature that would come along. And it were things that they loved. God gave that to his people. And the Torah, it was a precious gift to them because it came directly from God and it was directly to them. The word of God for you. Every other nation lived in chaos because they had false gods. Some of them had many gods, and it was hard to keep track of all of these different gods and who had to be sacrificed, especially for those who were alive coming out of Egypt. The Egyptian culture had a god for so many different things, and yet when God established his covenant with them in the wilderness and he gave them his law, it was going into the land of Canaan, the promised land, where all of those little city-states had different religions and gods, and some of them are evil spirits that people are still, whether they realize it or not, worship them even today. But God was saying, I'm establishing this with you. I'm speaking directly with you. In the middle of this chaos, I have chosen you, and I am speaking my law to you and for you. And instead of despising law, they loved it because it set them apart. Every other one had so many different weird traditions, customs, and frankly, evil things about them. But the law of God was perfect in every way. Let me put it this way. I've spoken about my grandfather a lot through the years. He was a primary spiritual influence in my life until he passed away in 2001. And when I talk about my grandfather he and his spiritual influence, that's not to say that my parents were negative influences. Not at all. My parents were wonderful and still are wonderful. But because they would work, I would spend a lot of time at my grandparents' house, especially during the summers. I was blessed to be able to go to my grandparents' house, and I had the opportunity for them to pour into me. So for my grandfather, he was a pastor for decades, and he traveled all over the country. He would take these small, struggling churches and build them up, and then he would get a call to go to another state. And just I want to tell you his journey just because he's just an awesome servant of God. He started in a little town called Fort Ogden, Florida. And if you don't know where Fort Ogden is, you're not alone. It's south of Arcadia. So Fort Ogden, and then he went from there all the way up to West Virginia. And from West Virginia, he went across the country to Oregon. And this is when my father and my aunt were smaller, so they loaded everything up in a station wagon and headed across the country. I got to speak with my grandmother about this a few weeks ago, and it was so great to just hear the stories of them traveling across the country in a Volkswagen, or not a Volkswagen, a station wagon, pulling a U-Haul. So they, from West Virginia to Oregon, then from Oregon all the way back across the country to Pennsylvania. And then from Pennsylvania, halfway across to Kansas. And then from Kansas down to Alabama, and from Alabama to Florida, where he pastored his last church, and he eventually would retire. But when he retired, he couldn't really afford to live. My grandparents couldn't afford much because they were told, oh, you don't have to worry about retirement. The Lord's going to come back. So you just sow that money back into your ministry right now. Well, then my grandfather retired. The Lord hadn't come back, and he couldn't afford to live and keep up with his medication. He had Parkinson's disease and had tremors, and his hands would shake. His voice was weak. It forced him into an early retirement. He retired in his 50s because he didn't have the strength in his voice to project the way that he needed to preach anymore. So my parents paid their electric bill, and my aunt and uncle paid their water bill, and they would switch off on those. But they could use, my grandparents would use that little monthly Social Security check that they would get to pay for his medicine and to pay the mortgage on their house and just to survive. So for my 16th birthday, knowing that he couldn't get me what most 16-year-old boys would want, back then I probably wanted a Super Nintendo game. Madden, let's see, if I was 16, that would have been 1993. So I wanted Madden 93, and I really wanted Madden 93 for Super Nintendo. He couldn't afford to get me Madden 93. But what he could do was, there was this amazing testimony about him, is he would have those tremors, but not when he would paint. Now, when we were little, or when I was little, I would stay at their house and we would watch Bob Ross. And you know, you're chuckling because you know exactly what it is. And one of the things that was so cool about my grandfather is he had the afro just like Bob Ross. It was awesome. I've got some pictures, and I actually didn't pull one of those, and if I had thought about it, I would have. But he had the perfectly, picked out afro. It was beautiful. And so we would watch that when I was little, and he began to do that. And when he painted, his hand wouldn't tremble. And I've got one of the ones that, so here's what he offered. He said, I will paint you a painting for your 16th birthday. And that means more to me than almost anything else in the world that I own. That specific one is the one that he painted when I was 16. But through the years, I have collected some other ones. He painted some and gave them to my family and to my parents. Just, he would get to painting, and he said, hey, I got another painting. And I would take some, my aunt would take some, and whatever. And when he passed, we found some more in the garage. I ended up with those because I was the firstborn, I was the male heir, and I flexed and said, that's a painting my papa painted, that's going home with me. And my cousins were like, but I'm like, yes, but you're girls and you're younger than me. We're still in therapy over that. But it meant something amazing to me because when I look at that, Now you might see that and you think, okay, well, I can see how it's got some Bob Ross to it. It's not really as good as Bob Ross. Well, of course not. It's my grandfather who had Parkinson's disease. It means something amazing to me. If you were to see something like this at a yard sale, you'd probably pay $1 for the frame and get rid of the painting. But the painting means something so much deeper. Whenever I look at them, I get strength and comfort because it reminds me of what he taught me and the example that he was to me. This one right here is up in my living room. I have other ones that I've put up in, the idea is we have a cabin on the campground in Waimama over in Hillsborough County on the Church of God campground. And that is going to kind of be my homage to him, is to have those all up there because that's something that connects me there. And it means something to me because when I look at that, I've faced so many trials in my life and in my ministry, and I've looked at those paintings and wished that he was here. There have been times in my pastorate that I have looked and thought, I so wish that I could just sit down with my papa and explain some of the trials that I've gone through and explain some of the hurt that I carry and have his compassionate, weak voice just tell me that everything's going to be okay. And that's my connection with him. And it's special because it's a visual reminder of this amazing gift that I have been given. The Jews saw the Torah in the same way. They saw the Torah as something to be revered and respected. And it was this very amazing thing that they would put on display in the synagogue. It wasn't like today where everybody has a Bible and you might have multiple Bibles. I've got a shelf on my office with 24 different kinds of study Bibles in different versions, and it wasn't like that. The Torah would be on display at the synagogue, and it would be the best. It would be on the best parchment. It would be on the best scrolls that they could have, and they would get up and read from it, and it was treated with so much respect because it was God's gift to them. There was so much of my identity represented in those oil-based Bob Ross-style paintings. And it was the same way for the Jews in the Torah. They based their entire existence and society around the law because they loved it. And King David in Psalm 119, when he was writing about it, he said this in Psalm 119, beginning in verse 97, "Oh, how I love your law. It is my meditation all the day. Your commandment makes me wiser than my enemies, for it is ever with me. I have more understanding than all my teachers. For your testimonies are my meditation. Oh, how I love your law." They meditated on it. They looked at it every day, and they loved it. Using that comparison, going back to my grandfather's paintings, how you can imagine how much, with how much love that I have for those paintings of my papa, and how they're connected to my spiritual upbringing. You can just imagine how I would feel if someone came along teaching and preaching in a way that threatened the things that I learned from him. He was a good man. In fact, if you'd have asked me back then, I'd have said the Bible got it wrong. I'd have said, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God except for C.G. Cannon. He came out of the womb perfect. Now, over time, after his death especially, I learned that, my grandfather had a past. No, I don't want to know all of that. No, he was perfect. I found out that my grandfather got saved after my dad was born. So my father had memories of his parents before they were saved, and that was a foreign concept to me. But you could imagine, especially in that time, if someone had told me something about my grandfather that was contrary to what I knew. And the thing was, I didn't know everything, but I thought I did because I was the firstborn. I was the one who spent all the time with him. This deeply rooted sense of being and purpose that came from his example. That's the way that the religious leaders were in Jesus' day. He comes along and starts teaching the opposite of what they knew. And the whole world looks different through the lens of Jesus' teaching. He's changing their perception. So what would be next? He's changing all of this about how we know, about what we know. Is the law next? Is he going to change the law? The law is our line in the sand. The law came from God. The law is our painting that hangs on the wall that reminds us who God is. Is he going to change that? The law is precious. Since what he's saying is so different than what they've been taught, is he going to abolish the law? In verse 17, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Look, I understand what's precious to you. It has given you insight and understanding. And whether you realize it or not, I was there when it was written. This law has ministered to you in times of trouble. It has sustained you your entire lives. You have memorized it from the time that you were children, hiding the word in your heart. I'm not here to abolish the law and the prophets. I'm here to fulfill it. The law was good. The law was life. And it always had been. But here's the problem. The law was the object of their affection, not the lawgiver. You see, the laws were intended to be a path to God the Father, who is the lawgiver, but they had that mixed up. The law was to show them where they fall short and how they are in need. Yet they fixated on the word and on the law as the source of their righteousness. Understand, the law can never be the source of righteousness. It can, however, be the course of righteousness. The law is not the source, but it's the way that we travel. So if they enter into a discipleship relationship with Jesus, then what happens is they conform to the law. They had these laws, they were precious to them, but it wasn't enough for them. They had to protect those laws. The law that God gave, the 10 Commandments, and all of the rules that were in the Torah. If you want to ever dive into that, I encourage you, open up the book of Deuteronomy and read through Deuteronomy, and some of it you'll just be going, whoa. But the law was precious to them, but it wasn't enough. They were so afraid that they would break those laws, so they created more laws to protect those laws. I don't want to break this covenant with God. I don't want to break any commandment. So I'm going to build these insulating laws on this level so that I don't even come close to that. And what happens if they break those laws? Well, then I'm too close to breaking the big law. So we're going to create even just another layer, just a little bit more insulation, because we have to protect these laws. We have to protect the law of God. So we build outside of it, and then we build another layer outside of that. And by the time Jesus came along, there were over 600 rules and laws that they were abiding by, they were enforcing. That's the way they lived at that time, and they loved the law. So the law that was intended to set them apart, the law that was identifying them as the people of God and was intended to give them freedom, had become a straitjacket of restriction that put them in bondage. And it was their own doing. We are in a season right now in sports where we are in the NBA Finals. Different people fall in different areas of cheering for things. I happen to really like Steph Curry, so I'll be cheering for the Warriors. They're down 1-0, but there's a game tonight, and I'm cheering on Steph Curry. But imagine you're watching a basketball game, and I've got a picture of the court right here. You can see how it's all laid out. Is it not there? Okay, well, go with me. Oh, there we go. Okay, so you're watching the game, and what happens if you aren't too familiar with the rules of basketball is if you are in the process of taking a shot and someone fouls you, they hit you, they bump you, whatever it is, and it impedes your ability to take the shot, you get to go stand at the free throw line, and without anybody putting a hand in your face, without anybody running around, you get to stand at the line, take your time, and take a free throw, and it's worth 1 point. Now, let's in comparison to what we've been talking about. All right, so somebody is standing at the line, and they're worried. All right, there's the line. If my foot goes over that line, then it doesn't count. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to play it safe. I'm going to back up to the 3-point line. And it's not worth 3 points, but you can see how much further away from the goal it is. It's designed for you to get as close as you can without crossing that line, and you can make your basket because it's easier the closer you are. But no, I'm going to step back here because I don't want to, my legs are weak, it's late in the game, and if I trip, maybe I'll stumble and while I'm walking up there and accidentally, so I'm going to move back here. You know what? Man, I'm not even comfortable here. I'm going to shoot my free throws from half court, which isn't visible in this picture, but it's another 10 feet beyond. And then you've got somebody shooting a shot that should be the easiest shot in the game, and they're hurling it with two hands from half court. That's not entertaining. I mean, it might be the first time you see it, but that, especially if it's at the end of the game and it's a close game, no, I don't want to have to deal with that. That's not the point of the game. The point of the game is not to stay within the lines. It's important. It's even necessary, but it's not the point of the game. The point is not to play it so safe that you focus on never breaking the rules. I don't want to break the rules, so I'm going to make things even more difficult for myself and everybody else and my teammates, and I'm going to shoot this free throw from half court because I can't break the rule. The point is to play the game because you love it. And when you play the game, the rules are part of it. Another way to look at it is, I'm just all about showing pictures today. Another way to think of it is like a wedding. So I've got a picture of me and Lindsay on our wedding day. I expected a bigger awe than that. I was pausing to take a drink so you could, oh, come on, try again. Right, not for me, for that beautiful woman over there. There you go. Look, I've said it before. I'll say it the day I die. I know I'm married up. That right there is the biggest miracle I've ever seen God perform. Wow, I didn't expect that big of a response. No. When I got married, there were laws involved. There was law. We had to sign some papers, but when I'm talking about covenant that took place. So this is beyond just regular law. This is covenant. And I stood right there on that deck on the side of that lake on Good Friday in 2002 and made covenant vows with my wife. Now, what if I had been there and I'm thinking, we're going through the vows and during the ceremony, I didn't think that I could live up to those vows. Now this is hypothetical. I didn't do this, but I'm painting the picture. If I didn't think I could live up to those vows, so I added some stuff in there, just as a precaution. I promised to honor and cherish in sickness and in health. But, I start thinking, oh man, that's a tall order. And this is a covenant. This is serious. This isn't just, I'm just saying some words. This is serious. So in sickness and in health, and when you sneeze, I promise to say bless you. And when you have a runny nose, I promise to cover you up in bed, and I will drive to Chick-fil-A and get you a chicken noodle soup. And if it's on Sunday, I will make it from scratch. And I will take complete care of the kids until your runny nose is healed. Because I don't want to violate that vow, that law, that covenant that we are making with one another in that moment. So I put some more restrictions on it. It's a good thing though, right? But in order to live up to all of that, now I'm years into the marriage and I'm walking around all day concerned that Lindsay's going to catch a cold. And what happens? Kids bring germs. And so I don't want my wife to catch germs from these kids. So she has to wear a mask. And my kids have to wear a mask because I'm promising that I will take care of her, and I am taking care of her by putting her in a mask, and I'm protecting the vows that I made with her, and that's ridiculous, right? The rules that I added made that relationship strained. If I focus on the rule but not the one on whom I should focus, I ruin my relationship because I'm all about the law. Because I'm more concerned with not violating this law. And it's not even just the covenant law of marriage, it's what I've added to it. Verse 20, for I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. You see, this righteousness that Jesus is talking about is not earned. This righteousness is not something that you can get because you just try harder, because you just have done everything that you can to remember that law. He's teaching them then, and he's saying this morning, that he is offering a greater righteousness. And it's greater because it's not blessed on being a robot. It's greater because it's not based on focusing on checking a list and obeying a set of rules. The righteousness through Jesus comes by knowing him and by falling in love with him. Following the rules becomes less of a focus when you fall in love with Jesus, because at that point it just comes naturally. Going back to the marriage, when Lindsay gets sick, I will take care of her. And of course, as a man, when I get sick, I feel like she doesn't take near as good a care as me. She's like, I birthed children. You have a 99.9 fever. Oh, I'm miserable. Oh. No. I become a baby when if I have a fever. But I am able to care for her. I'm able to keep that vow because I am in love with my wife. Not because I said it and I'm going to stick to my word and I am a man of my word. Those things being true, the focus is on my wife and on providing for her. And that means that sometimes I'm not going to drive to Chick-fil-A and get her chicken noodle soup, but I will care for her and make sure that she has what she needs because I'm in love with her. Following the rules, I'm not walking around all day worried about her getting sick and what that will mean for me because I'm in love with her. There are some who have had struggles with sin. Even some in the room, you've tried time and time again to overcome a habit or a failure or whatever it is. It just keeps happening. And you genuinely feel remorse. You genuinely feel bad about what's happened. And you tried to overcome it. But the way you've tried to overcome it is by determining in your mind, this time it's going to be different. This time, I was weak last time. And you know what? I kind of allowed myself to go to this place. I kind of allowed myself to watch this thing. I allowed myself to have this or to do that. And what I have to do is I just have to remove that. And then it'll be okay. I can do this. I can fix this. I feel bad about it every time, and you remind yourself of that. And God, it's me again, and I really need your forgiveness. But you're not necessarily spending more time with him. You're not necessarily spending more time in prayer. You're not getting deeper into his word where he is revealing more of himself to us. Instead, you're just trying to follow the rules better. It didn't work then. It's not going to work now. You can't follow the rules better just because you know the rules. The scribes and Pharisees had the word memorized from the time that they were little. They could only get to that point by knowing the word. Yet, Jesus said you have to have a greater righteousness than even them. They're making their way around to here. Don't be distracted by them leaving. You can't follow the rules just because you've memorized or you know the rules. When Jesus was tempted in the wilderness, the enemy used the rules. Even the enemy knows the Word of God. The only way you can follow the law of God is to follow Jesus and fall in love with him and desire him in every area of your life. Because if it's left up to you alone, it'll be a failure every time. Every time. The more of Jesus you have in your life, the less and less vulnerable you are to falling into sin. And you begin to realize that you don't have that same desire that you used to. You begin to realize the closer you get to Jesus, the more of his attributes begin to show in your life. The more fruit of the Spirit becomes evident in your daily walk. And then you realize that you're not as focused on the rules as you used to be. You were walking with Jesus and you were watching the rules and making sure that you weren't, but he's saying, I'm right here. He's walking alongside you and like, I got you, Jesus. You hold my hand, and I'm going to look here and make sure, because I want more of you. I want all of you. So I'm going to hold on to your hand, and we're going to walk this way, and I'm going to be focused on these rules because I don't want to ruin this relationship. I don't want to ruin what we got here, Jesus. So I have to make sure that I'm not and this rule over here, and then right. Wait, what? But when you walk with him and you're holding his hand, you have the law. You have the word that you get into every day. You hide it in your heart that you might not sin against him. But your focus is him. You begin to see that, I'm not worried about this temptation over here anymore because I'm not focused on not being tempted. I'm focused on my Savior. I'm focused on this relationship with the Son of God. Pastor Roy and I were talking this morning in the office. He has been on this 3-week trip where he went all the way out to Montana, to Yellowstone Park, and did a big loop through the majority of the country. Beautiful. I followed it on social media. Many of you did too. It's beautiful to see his family go through all of these places. And he told me about how all of the beauty that he saw really spoke to him of the wonder and the majesty of God and his creation and how amazing all of this is. And I get that, having gone on a trip through a similar area recently. I've never laid eyes on the Rocky Mountains until the last week of March of this year. And coming across Montana, it was just this amazing, and I understand the beauty of that creation, and it resonated with me. Because I look into what he has given us, and it makes me love him even more. And I'm not concerned about the rules as much as I once was because I'm in love with the lawgiver. How do you keep the law? You can't do it on your own ability. You keep the law by focusing on the lawgiver and being a disciple of Jesus, pursuing him daily. And as you do that, then the law comes naturally. And that is a righteousness that is beyond the scribes and the Pharisees. That is a righteousness that burns with a desire to please Jesus. The religious leaders fixated on the law, and they had an incomplete picture. The law then and now is true. The law is still in effect. Jesus did not come to abolish the law. He came to fulfill it. And it's possible for us through Jesus to live lives of righteousness. Will you stand? To live lives of greater righteousness than what the scribes and the Pharisees had. If you're struggling this morning with sin, you're not going to fix it by just making up in your mind that you're going to follow the rules better this time. I didn't follow them as good last time, but now I know. Now I've seen where I failed, and I just have to do this. I just have to be this, because then I can do it. I can beat it. You'll overcome that sin issue when you move your trust and your focus to the lawgiver by loving the Prince of Peace, by becoming his disciple. This morning, as I'm preparing for a time of prayer, if you don't know the lawgiver and you see Christianity as just a bunch of rules and a bunch of things that you feel like, when I talked about the restriction and the straitjacket, you feel like that's what Christianity is. Jesus is here this morning to set you free from that. He was telling his followers then, and he's telling you now, that is not what this is. I am not abolishing the law. I am fulfilling the law. I'm showing you the better way. I'm showing you how it should have been before you decided to insulate what my Father gave you with your own rules, and then you insulated that with even more rules, and you added on and added on, I'm pushing all that aside and I'm showing you the simplicity of a relationship. And when you're looking at me and you're focused on being my disciple instead of on whether or not you'll be able to fulfill the law and live up to the standard, because we never will. And all we have to do is call on His name and focus on Him. That will come. Obeying the law comes along with the relationship, because you won't want to go and be that person that you were. But in doing so, you have to focus on the lawgiver. As I begin to pray this morning, if there's anyone in here that you've had that struggle, or maybe you want to make that decision today, you're seeing things in a different light, you're seeing things in such a way that you want to come down and you want to dedicate your heart to the Lord, today is your opportunity. You can do that. We will pray with you. We will lead you in the sinner's prayer, which is, honestly, it's a way for you to submit yourself to Him. It's not about, again, it's not about law. It's not about if I say this word in this order, then God must act on this way. No, it's about coming and submitting your heart to Him, casting your cares on Him by saying, I want that law. I don't want Christianity that the world has made it. I don't want Christianity that culture has made. I don't want Christianity the way that people think that it should be. I want freedom in Jesus. You know the reason that they were called Christian? They weren't originally. They were called people of the way, with a capital W, Jesus being described as the way. Eventually, they were called Christians at some point because the word says that they were called Christians, and what that literally means is little Christs. They were behaving like little Jesuses running around and doing the things that Jesus did. They lived the way that He lived. They were His example. So by being Christian, it doesn't mean like being what somebody on this news channel says is to be a Christian. Being a Christian is not what being this your favorite TV preacher says is being a Christian. Being a Christian is about being what Jesus says. Not speaking against any TV preacher, anything specifically. I am saying, let's get the focus on Jesus, because He is our example. The word says this, so I'll give you one more layer. Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ. So I'll give you that layer. But I'm not going to follow this person because they follow this person because they follow Paul who follows Christ. No, let's go straight to the source. Let's go straight to the one who said, the law that I'm giving you, Jesus said, take my yoke upon you and learn of me because it's easy and my burden is light. Same concept. You've been told this. Let's strip all that away. This is what it is. His yoke is easy. It's simpler. It doesn't mean that you're never going to experience temptation. It doesn't mean that you're never going to experience hard times. It means that you cast your cares on Him and you look to Him, because then your issues seem to be a whole lot smaller and a whole lot less. I'm going to stop talking. It's time to pray. If you have need, you can come this morning. Come lay your